Khrushchev and Eisenhower were opposed to the English, French, and Israeli invasion of Egypt in 1956, the Suez Crisis, the Suez Canal Crisis. So both Russia and America opposed English, French, and Israeli invasion of Egypt, and even though the Suez Canal was taken away from Egypt, both the English of England, right, the United Kingdom English, and then French of France, they withdrew. And so what the 1956 Suez Canal Crisis had demonstrated to the entire world was that now the English and the French were no longer the main world powers. They had to withdraw because both Russia and America said they needed to back the fuck up. And so, yeah, good on Eisenhower, good on Khrushchev. This was, good feelings towards the Arab world. Now, Eisenhower was going to launch Operation Bluebat in 1958 with the Lebanon crisis. And Americans, the Marines are going to occupy Beirut, the Beirut airport, the port of Beirut, and the city itself. And it's going to be successfully occupied by American and Lebanese government forces. It's going to be a 3-month occupation until eventually President Camille Chamoun, looks like Chamoun, so I'm going to go with Chamoun. So President Chamoun, who requested the American assistance, completed his term, and the toppling of a pro-Western government in Iraq's July 14th revolution, when the Iraqis killed their last king, Faisal II, and a prime minister, plus internal instability, had caused President Chamoun to call for U.S. assistance. So President Chamoun, there's rumors that he was trying to change the Constitution, and it was an illegal run for a second term, and the U.S. was trying to install American back into the thing for the second term. So, Chamoun is trying to change the Constitution, a legal run for a second term, appealed to the U.S. for support for his re-election. So, it ultimately isn't going to work out for Chamoun if he was trying to use the U.S. forces to reinstall him in for another term. So, Chamoun is Christian, and he's pro-Western democracy, friends with the Americans, and there is some talk of the rebels having Marxist or communist, or there was, Russian influence somehow. So Eisenhower is going to blow up the Marxist influence up to, a huge deal. He's going to blow it up to where it's the main reason when he pitches the Lebanese war to the American people, it's all about communism. But ultimately, he could have just said we were there to defend their government. But no, for Eisenhower, we invaded because of communism. We invaded the Middle East. This is the first invasion of the Middle East by America. And ultimately, it's going to work out well for us, but a lot of times we get into wars with not the best of intentions, and if it works out, it works out. So Lebanon is a very small country, so what the fuck do we have to do with Lebanon? It's smaller than Connecticut, but Eisenhower had said we have to act in Lebanon, or we just need to get the fuck out of the Middle East entirely. Just get out of the Middle East entirely. So Eisenhower and Truman, right after World War II, were acting like they owned the entire world, and if they wanted to invade Lebanon, they could. Just really their own, conscience, their only moral dictates were the only thing that would have stopped them. But basically he was saying that if we're not going to act in Lebanon, they need us, we're not going to act there, then we should just stay out of the Middle East. This is a perfect opportunity for us to actually do something good. So President Eisenhower says, all right, America, we need to stop the civil strife actively fomented by the Soviet and Cairo broadcast. So in Lebanon, you had a bunch of propaganda by Egypt and Russia, and apparently that was the reason why there was a civil war in Lebanon. Okay, so now America's on board. America's going to go and try to broker the rebels, the different rebels, the communists, the Islamic rebels versus the Christian pro-Western government. I think that's an oversimplification, but that element was a part of it. So the president of Lebanon says, America comes help. All right, so we're going to go help, right? He pitches it to the American people. I don't know if he got congressional authority or not. But Ronald Reagan didn't need congressional authority, so maybe he used Eisenhower's, precedent. But the Marines are going to invade into a confused, bikini-clad sunbather and surfer and beach-goer scene. So the U.S. Marines are going to invade Beirut. And so they're in full tactical gear, camo guns, the works, and there's a bunch of, there's 3 aircraft carriers coming up from behind them, then 70 warships in the Mediterranean Sea, and then there was the threat of the United States deploying nukes from German bases, and some of the villagers, basically it was just a civilian scene, and they were stunned. The beachgoers stood up and were, standing in silence. And then other vendors started trying to sell their wares to the U.S. soldiers. The cigarettes, sandwiches, Cokes. There was even the Lebanese kids were asking, hey, Jack, you want a Coke? Hey, Jack, you want a Coke? They were trying to make themselves a dime from the U.S. soldiers. So it was a peaceful invasion. So it was a successful invasion. It was a peaceful invasion. We got away with it. There was nobody that attacked us, no resistance whatsoever. It wasn't totally bloodless, but the initial invasion was. After the invasion, after Beirut Airport, Beirut, the port, and the city is taken over by the U.S. Marines, while some of the Marines were doing a perimeter around the airport, there is some snipers, and there is 2 reports. One was killed, and another was 30. So I don't know how we don't know if 1 soldier or 30 soldiers were killed by snipers, but that happened in the days right after the initial invasion. So it wasn't completely bloodless. There was either 1 to maybe 30 who were killed outright by snipers after the first, the D-Day, whatever, the hour 1. Whatever, the first invasion. So then 2 soldiers are also going to drown by swimming. So they were swimming, and I guess they were no good at swimming and they drowned. That seems very fucking precarious. So put them on the list too. So either 3 or 33 Americans died total in the Lebanese invasion and occupation, but 4,000 had died in the Civil War. So it was a bloody affair between, how many ever groups, 4,000 people are getting killed. It was looking like a genocide. The government asked America to come, so we came. And we were all pretty much not there to take over. The U.S. Marines were definitely going to come home, so they were there temporarily. They were there to just broker the peace between the 2, make sure there was a peaceful transfer of power. He wanted to, that Shamoon wanted to go ahead and finish his term all the way up, right? So he wanted to, there was only a month or 2 left in his term, but he also was, trying some shenanigans, trying to extend his term. So what happens, right? We invaded, successful. Now, Eisenhower had predicted that this first invasion into the Middle East might turn into a Pandora's box of a U.S. addiction of meddling in the Middle East, and he was right. But he was right about this. This turns out wonderfully for us. So what happens? Okay, July 15th, 1958, Operation Blue Bat commences. Eisenhower doctrine is to protect the nations, especially from the specters of international communism. Eisenhower declared to the world, they won't have a compassionate economic system, not so long as T-Buck cowboys around. So Eisenhower hated communists, hated socialism. Eisenhower is actually a bigger socialist than Bernie Sanders because he believed in the 92% marginal tax rate on the rich, whereas Bernie Sanders only believes in the 90%. Now, Robert D. Murphy is convinced that both sides of the conflict, so you have this mediator, Robert D. Murphy, gets a hold of both sides, whoever both sides are. They reach a compromise by electing the moderate Christian general Fuad Shihab. C-H-E-Hab, H-A-B. So Shihab, Fuad, Shihab. So President Shamoon only served until September 22nd, so July, August, September, 2 months after the invasion. He steps down, and then President Shihab is the president of Lebanon. So Fuad Shihab becomes President Shihab. And then President Shihab says that the revolution has no winners and no losers. Well, if they're saying everybody wins with the revolution, I guess he's just trying to say, he's trying to bury the hatchet, right? So he was fighting for the revolution or against, I can't tell with that quote. The revolution has no winners and no losers. So who is this President Shihab? He was a Christian, right? So if there was some Islamist tension, well, him being a Christian, him being Western, chosen, mediated, Shihab is going to serve 6 years, the one term of his presidency out, and he's going to refuse to run for re-election. He doesn't want the renomination of his party, right? So President Shihab did his 1 year like Cincinnatus, got, absolute power, and then he stepped down. And then other people ran, and I think his chosen guy is going to lose by just a single vote. So Shihab's legacy was to go on and represent statehood and the rule of law. So he had a stable government. He represented statehood. The rule of law was upheld. President Shihab, it's going to turn out to be a good 6 years for Lebanon. So overall, the crisis, the Lebanese Civil War is over. 14,000 U.S. Marines, or Americans total 14,000 soldiers, American soldiers were involved. All 14,000 men arrived in 4 days. The Leathernecks is a nickname for the Marines. So the Leathernecks, 14,000 Leathernecks, October 25th, 1958 is when the U.S. forces are going to withdraw. So October 25th, July, August, September, October. So 3 months, 10 days, we were in, we were out, like, crap through a goose. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Get your shit together, Lebanon. All right, your shit together, peace. And then we were out. Now, Khrushchev is going to take a lot of credit for it, but it seems like, Operation Blue Bat was kind of open-close. They were there to mediate the compromise. They had a good compromise to come out of it. The Shihab turned out to be, a very good president. Not the best president, I don't think, but he wasn't bad. There wasn't no obvious scandals, no big wars or genocides or, bad shit that happened. So he represents statehood. He represents the rule of law. He represented stability. So this was a good invasion. This is good on Eisenhower for seeing the need and then intervening in the name of, Christian capitalism, whatever his definition of it is, because he would be considered a socialist. 92% marginal tax rate on the rich. That's more socialist than Bernie Sanders. So this is a Republican Eisenhower, and he would be conservative compared to Truman and FDR. FDR had a 94% marginal tax rate, whereas Eisenhower had a 92%, 90% marginal tax rate. So he was a little bit more conservative. But 90%, what is it, like 30% today? So 90%, could you imagine? We're going to tax you 90%. And the whole idea, the reason why Eisenhower did that was because if you tax somebody 90%, that gives the government pretty much total control over your industry. So Eisenhower said, okay, we're going to take 90% of, everything you make, everything you produce. We're just going to take it, all of it, unless, and this gives the, businesses an option to do good for society, and Eisenhower says, unless you reinvest into your company and create more jobs. You're creating more jobs. That's good for the company, good for the employment level, unemployment. So you're creating jobs for people, creating, paid positions, and investing in, instead of just taking your profits and splurging, you're reinvesting into your own company, which makes your company stronger. So you get your money, get to keep your money if you reinvest in your own company and create jobs. That's good for America, good for the company, good for everybody. So that's the reason why he had a 90% marginal tax rate. So, yeah, this was the first American invasion of the Middle East. Turned out wonderful. We were in, out, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Compared to Ronald Reagan's, debacle, Ronald Reagan's Benghazi. Ronald Reagan occupied Lebanon for 2 years in 1982, 1984. Started August 20th, ended February 7th or shortly thereafter. So 1.5-year occupation, 2 years, and instead of 14,000 Marines, it was 1,800, so a lot less. And then Hezbollah is going to drive 2 trucks armed with explosives into the Marine barracks at the Beirut Airport Hotel, where the Marines are staying, and 241 Marines are going to be killed. So, yeah, Reagan cut and run. That's his Benghazi. He was like, fuck you guys, and just took the fuck off. Reagan sized up the circumstances, and we withdrew, right? We lost the war in Lebanon. With Eisenhower, we won. When it comes to the Lebanese invasion, we won. We got good graces. We was a humanitarian. It was good all around. We did. It was very good, right? We settled the thing to our interest. It seemed like it, for them to be stable was in our interest, but it wasn't such a obvious puppet that, the opposition were all pissed off. And then I think it's going to be an Islamist who gets in there after Shihab. So you had, Shamoun, who was a Christian, Shihab, who was a Christian, and then you're going to have an Islamic president right afterwards. And so Eisenhower essentially, set up a system to where an Islamic person could be elected, and if they got the majority, then they took the power. So yeah, Eisenhower's Lebanese war was 100% successful, and Ronald Reagan's Lebanese war was 100% failure. But in some respects, because of the Vietnam, we just get stuck in the muck and we just stay there for decades. I would say that if you're going down the wrong road, it's never too late to turn back around. So it's a loss because what did we win with Lebanon? But then what would we have gained if we would have stayed? And so I think it was a victory. It's a victory to stop a Vietnam War. It's a victory to stop a bad war. It's progressive. You're headed in the right direction. But to just dig in, stay the course, no matter whether, my country, right or wrong, no, fuck that. We're a force for good, or we, just need to get out of the business of warfare altogether. So that's Eisenhower. And Khrushchev, he threatened to use nuclear, weapons. Eisenhower didn't give a fuck. Oh, you're going to threaten to use nuclear weapons? I'm going in. Right? I don't give a fuck if you threaten nuclear weapons. So they're just threatening, nukes. I'm going to nuke you over here. I'm going to nuke you over there. I'm going to nuke you everywhere. Russians in Moscow outside U.S. Embassy protesting Lebanese invasion. Police kept order. So there's these protests in Moscow. Khrushchev takes credit for getting the U.S. to withdraw out of Lebanon with the World Public Opinion and by taking the matter to the United Nations. So should I read this? Yeah, I'll read this. So, yeah. Then we counteracted the U.S. landing in Lebanon, not by military means, but by mobilizing world public opinion. The invasion met with outbursts of public protest from all over the world. We also began demonstrative military preparations to show that we would be ready and willing to extend military aid in the Near East if it were needed. We then raised the matter in the United Nations and forced the Americans to withdraw their troops from Lebanon. So, yeah, he's got military preparations, showing military might, and then saying, we're going to dump a bunch of military aid in this country if you don't get this shit right. Talking to the United Nations, hey, they had no business being there, and then eventually, once the new president has been chosen, once the matter has been resolved, then Eisenhower gets the U.S. Marines, all 14,000, and get the fuck up out of Dodge. And they all come back home, successful. Went to Lebanon, brokered an agreement, mediated it successfully, and then, didn't stick around for an occupation. Said, this is your country. Beirut, you get to keep your country. So Ronald Reagan should have been more like Dwight D. Eisenhower. Bernie Sanders is more like Dwight D. Eisenhower than Ronald fucking Reagan. Ronald Reagan is really when it all went downhill. First, he invades Lebanon, gets all those Marines killed. Then he just fucks our country up. I don't know. Okay, so, yeah, vote for Bernie Sanders. Peace.